Good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, I'm your host, Frank Acom, and we are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio this morning. We have a lot to get to this morning. Of course, we start with the news from yesterday, and I've got to warn you, there still is not a lot known about the shooting at the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl parade, but we do know tragically one person has died, 22 shot, including 9 children. 3 people were taken into custody, police officers have said, and that the shooting is not terror-related, according to law enforcement, speaking with the New York Post. Because of bad actors, which were very few, this tragedy occurred even in the presence of uniformed law enforcement officers, noting that there were some 800 cops deployed in the area at the time of the shooting. We've seen the videos by now of the heroic Chiefs fans tackling who they believed to be the shooter. If we have any more information, we'll pass that along to you. Also, another big story, and we are going to get into a lot of nuanced things this morning as well. I received some comments after the program about the Swazi victory. We'll talk a little bit about that. We do have some presidential info as well. Perhaps one of the biggest stories in the news this morning is Mike Turner's announcement that we have a serious national security threat on our hands. There's a lot of pushback on Representative Turner because of his statement. Turner's cryptic message, and this coming specifically from Axios, is a rare example of a top House official calling for the president to declassify information about an ongoing threat. Now, he is the House Intelligence Committee chair. Obviously, as soon as I think any of us heard this, we've got instantly concerned and wanted to find out more information. What they are suggesting is that Russia wants to deploy a nuclear weapon in space to destroy not land, but to destroy Western satellites. Russia wants to put nuclear weapons in space to obliterate Western satellites. That's according to new U.S. intelligence. The frightening possibility was revealed after Mike Turner publicly said that we are at a serious national security threat. And it is interesting how many times on this program have we brought up the real threat of Russia and in combination with China. And I know many of you have seen, which we may dive into a little bit later on, that Putin, for lack of a better term, endorsed Joe Biden yesterday, saying that Joe Biden was more predictable, more, not established wasn't the word that he used, but more experienced. So you can tie all these things together, but the Kremlin has not yet launched the nuclear weapon into orbit. That's an important point, but is interested in doing so, according to the ABC, New York Times, and Washington Post, and what they reported. The unprecedented deployment of nuclear weapons into space would be geared towards striking enemy satellites rather than for the purpose of dropping A-bombs on Earth, the report says. Attacks on satellites could threaten communications as well as important scientific and military tools. Whether Russia actually has developed a space-based nuclear capability or it's merely interested in doing so is unclear. But think of this. We've talked about what would happen in the past with China hacking into our grid, what that would mean. We heard that just the other day. Well, I say the other day, probably a week or two ago. Time kind of blurs when you're talking international affairs and politics. But the threat of Chinese hackers taking over the grid and such things is something you may not even think of, sewer systems and the like. And then you have this where, what would this do to our communication system? Imagine a world. Now, I know many of you out there are saying, well, I could live without my cell phone, or I could live without whatever piece of technology, computer for a while. Maybe you could. There is a lot of people out there that would not be able to. We've talked in the past numerous times about especially younger people who are so glued or addicted to social media and the internet. What would this ultimately do? You could see where it would cause a panic. And then when I say communication, it's not just internet and so many other things. Your banking, the list goes on and on. So it is a very serious threat. I know there's criticism of Mr. Turner mentioning it in such cryptic terms. But it's something that I think maybe paints a larger picture of threats that people aren't aware of. As we talked about, the real serious threat of China and their connection with Russia, and both their goals of being a world superpower. I just wanted to bring up those not breaking news stories, but very big news stories. We're going to get into other issues, obviously, this morning. Feel free to weigh in at any time. You see the number on the bottom of your screen, 607-358-3131. Reach out, comment on the news of the day. What do you think of this real national security threat? Also, when we come back, we're going to hear from Congressman Langworthy. He released a statement, which is very time appropriate because of a story I brought to you yesterday, so we'll talk about that. I want to highlight, because I haven't mentioned this yet, Assemblyman Phil Palmisano will be on the program tomorrow. There's so much going on, and I know we've had him on it, and someone joked that we should have it Fridays with Phil, and it is kind of turning into that, but there's been so much to cover. CHIPS funding, we're going to talk about energy again. There's just so much to cover, and I look forward to hearing from the Assemblyman tomorrow, so you'll have to tune in. Right now, we take our first break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Thank you so much for joining us here on Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Yesterday, right at the end of the program, I brought you the report about the stunning or sheer steep drop of farms in New York State. And there's a lot of reasons for that, rules, regulations, just taxes, the same things that are driving residents out of New York State, driving farmers out of the business. In New York, there was a loss of 2,788 farms, including 1,865 dairy farms and 363,885 acres of farmland from 2017 to 2022. Well, yesterday, Congressman Langworthy led a bipartisan letter to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Secretary, Michael S. Regan, to urge the agency to refrain from considering a rule to require air emission reporting of certain substances from the natural breakdown of animal manure, going back to how many 1,865 dairy farms that we've lost. This stands to add significant red tape for farmers and ranchers in an industry that is already heavily regulated. And going back to the rules and regulations, and I mentioned New York specifically because even more heavy-handed, but this is in general. The letter is co-led by Congressman Jim Costa, a Democrat from California, and signed by a bipartisan coalition of 44 additional members. The members wrote, "Farmers and ranchers across our nation are good stewards of the land and have worked tirelessly to develop new practices on their farms to address environmental concerns. While we understand the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, requiring the report of air emissions from family farms in the future will put an unnecessary and unjustifiable burden on our nation's agricultural producers. Instead, it is the role of the government to continue providing producers with the tools we know work: voluntary, incentive-based, and locally led conservation programs." The letter continued, "We strongly urge EPA to continue to uphold the farm manure exemption from current reporting requirements to avoid imposing an unnecessary regulatory burden on our farmers and ranchers. Thank you for your consideration of our comments." It was signed by a lot of people, a lot of New York. Lee Stefanik's on there, Mark Molinaro. Wanted to pass that along to you, maybe something that may be a little more difficult to find, but it is very important for the state of New York. And we've talked about, this is an interesting story about New York with Suozzi, because it's got the New York aspect to it, but it's also got the obviously federal aspect to it, being that he is going to Congress, taking George Santos's old seat. I was kind of not relieved that it was over, but just that I was hoping it would cause the Santos story to fizzle out, and it has been lately, back in the news because he responded to his former colleagues, many of his former colleagues, in a mass text. We're going to mention that when we come back, and a couple comments from you, the viewers, so keep them coming in. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Our beautiful view of a chilly morning here on Market Street as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio here on Frankly Speaking. Yesterday, right towards the end of the program, I received this comment. The New York congressional election proved that all the city people can complain all they want, but choose to keep reliving the same thing over and over, yes, and making us in upstate pay. But I think that's the case in general. Listen, there's a mass exodus of New Yorkers. We're not telling any secrets. This has been said by many people. many times before me. But those same people that are leaving, in some instances, not all of them, of course, they keep voting in the same people and wondering why nothing changes. You know, you look at Lee Zeldin, who did a great job, but ultimately was defeated by Governor Hochul. We wonder why things like bail reform, public safety hasn't changed. We wonder why we're having such an issue with migrants in the city and the crime because of bail reform. I see that Governor Hochul actually released her proposals, if you will, to curb retail theft, because now, going back to when we're saying we're losing farmers, we're losing businesses as well that can't afford to eat the cost of these shoplifters. So what will this do? It would increase criminal penalties for third-party and online sales of stolen merchandise. Okay. Increase penalties for anyone assaulting retail workers. More funding for both law enforcement and district attorney's offices to both curb and prosecute retail theft cases, and a tax credit for businesses to offset costs of new security measures. So that almost sounds like you're accepting the loss with the tax credit proposal. But until we have a real serious change in bail reform and the end of the coddling of criminals, nothing's going to change, and especially when it comes to young people. We're learning about these gangs in New York City that are recruiting young migrant kids because they know that they're not going to get in trouble. And we've talked about it where before that, it was almost like a Charles Dickens scenario where you had young pickpockets and young kids robbing bars and the like because they knew they could not get in trouble. But this was kind of a tangent to what that viewer had to say. And this goes back into Suozzi's victory on Tuesday. It says, according to Dan Janison, that the GOP leadership is divided over how to spin Pillup's loss to Suozzi. I'm not really sure why you need the spin. There's so many factors in this. I know the media, and this is to be expected, suggesting that the dominoes are falling for Republicans now. It's all over. Republicans will probably never win a race ever again because of this one-off special election, which had how many factors going against it for a Republican to win? First of all, George Santos, all those voters who felt burnt by George Santos, who may not have voted or switched parties. You had the weather playing a factor. Of course, you had, because of that, early voting. Democrats use early voting very frequently. They support it more than Republicans. And what does that mean when a snowstorm comes? Republicans are odd man out. So I'm not really sure what there is to spin, but House Speaker Mike Johnson, and I think this is a good point by the speaker, said that Democrats were forced to spend $15 million on winning back a district where voters supported Joe Biden in 2020. So it cost them $15 million to win that race. But Byron Donalds told CNN it was stupid to have expelled the indicted Santos before he was convicted of a crime. And that's the point we were making yesterday on the program that many of you, the viewer, made as well, which was if this were a Democrat, they would not have expelled him. But as Republicans, they jump all over themselves to throw somebody out, throw somebody under the bus. It's just historic here. I mean, this is proven time and time again. So I do believe he has a point. This should not have happened. Now, Ed Cox, who is the Republican chairman of New York State, issued a statement saying, "Congratulations to Mazie Philip on a remarkable campaign that fell just short. Mazie was a phenomenal candidate and has a bright future in our party." Privately, however, GOP operatives, not Mr. Cox, but GOP operatives acknowledged that Philip ran a tightly scripted, somewhat inscrutable campaign who didn't engage voters. Well, you also had that Suozzi was already a representative. And, well, I'm going to get to another story on this that I think you'll find pretty funny, as a matter of fact. But this is how Mr. Jansen ends his op-ed, which leads to the question, will state and county GOP leaders find the gumption to answer Trump, since his shots at Philip were nastier than anything Suozzi issued during the campaign? A sharp response might benefit them later on, if only to show they have the self-respect to defend themselves and their choices. Well, I'm not gonna take the dig to say that their choice before was George Santos, but it really wasn't, because Nassau County, has that kind of the old machine way of doing politics. So, but a long time, this is from Politico, a long-time New York Democrat flipped the Republican seat, and the nation took notice. If you read between the lines here, basically what they said is a Democrat had to run, and this happens quite frequently, has to run almost as a conservative, has to run as a Republican almost to win. Embrace calls for strong border security. Acknowledge the advanced age of President Joe Biden. Pledge to support law enforcement and Israel. Democrat Tom Suozzi hit on all those points during the campaign for a bellwether House district on Long Island, successfully turning his party's chief vulnerabilities into assets. So if you run trying to act as a Republican, that helps with your party's vulnerabilities. Now, do we think for one moment, if come November, when you have many Democrats running for re-election, if they are running as quote-unquote Republicans and they win, they follow the Suozzi playbook here that CNN is so glowingly noticing, if they follow that, do you believe after they're sworn in that is how they'll govern? That's your question for today. You can reach out at the number on the bottom of your screen, because historically this is nothing new. Democrats very often run as if they are Republican light almost, and it does them well until they get in there and the voters, to that viewer's point, get the same thing over and over again. So anyway, it's glowing. It's just the most amazing thing. It's a bellwether, as it says here. I mean, this is just a sign of everything to come in November. Republican pollster issues a warning to the GOP. This is the final wake-up call. Now, I would be curious to know what you think. Republican pollster Frank Luntz. Now, there's been a lot of criticism in the past of Mr. Luntz for not being the quote-unquote Republican that they always try to portray him as. But Luntz issued a warning to Republicans following their defeat on Twitter or on X or whatever you want to call it, saying that the results are not an endorsement of Biden, but instead a rejection of House Republican chaos. While he believes voters in the district don't necessarily approve of Biden's policies, Republicans gave voters nothing to vote for. Democrats just flipped George Santos' House seat. Tonight is a final wake-up call for the House GOP. If they ignore or attempt to explain away why they lost, they will lose in November as well. The issue agenda is on their side. Their congressional behavior is not. Would you agree with that? I would say, and again, I think this is not some sign of things to come. I think it was a very fluke election. But I will say that the chaos, the term they always use in the House, is not beneficial in the long run. Why? Because of the media optics. The media can run with it. The media love running with stories like that. Chaos. They can't govern. And I know it's frustrated a lot of representatives who do want to accomplish some things, just for, if nothing else, when they're up for re-election, they can go back to their constituents and say, we did X, Y, and Z. So I think there is a part of that played in, but I don't think that's the major part. I think the major part is you had a Democrat who already served in Congress, who ran as and I know the media reports say moderate. Well, ran as, we'll say Republican-ish light, ran there. You have early voting playing in the hands of Democrats as the snowstorm hits. The list can go on and on. And as the one piece says, Philip, though not to beat somebody when they're down, kick somebody when they're down, but did run a very scripted campaign, which in today's political world isn't always the best, and that's why Suozzi kind of flipped the script there and went Republican. But when we come back, because I don't want to run too late, we're going to tell you, and then trust me, we're getting away from this. But I got to tell you what George Santos said. He's on his revenge tour. Now, I know I've said this on the program in the past. All the hype about George Santos, it got old. It was kind of like a pop culture phenomenon. And so it didn't bother me not to report on him ever again. I do want to get your opinion on what he had to say to some of his former colleagues when we come back, so stay with us. I know you just saw the promo for it, but I got a sneak peek of our Celebrating Black History Month special last night and a little bit this morning. I'm telling you, it is going to be good. I hope that you'll tune in. Really proud of how this turned out. Again, it's Friday at 10:30 p.m. right after news, and then Sunday at 2:08. Let me do that again. Sunday, February 18th at 11 a.m. So do not miss it. All right, welcome back to Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. A couple comments from viewers as we go along this morning. First of all, when the Democrats use I can't read my own writing here. Let me try it again. When the Democrats lie to the taxpayers on a daily basis, they can't be trusted 1 inch. Next comment. Frank, everyone I talk to agrees that the Republicans need to be more aggressive on early and mail-in voting. And once elected, stick together as a group. The question is, how do we get them to do it? Great question. I think if we knew the answer to that, we'd be definitely a highly paid political consultant in Washington. As to the question of more aggressive on early and mail-in voting, I'm not sure how to overcome that. I know there's a lot of questions as to the security of that, that everything will be above board. I don't see a problem with it. I think there's something about Republicans that really enjoy that experience of going to the polls and doing their civic duty. I mean, I think there is something about that. And also the added step of the early voting, you go in and it's not the same, that type of thing. I would highly encourage anybody to early vote. If nothing else, you think of little things. On election day, you don't feel well, or, you get called into work. I don't know, whatever the scenario, you think of what it is. Your car breaks down, whatever the case may be. So I do encourage you to early vote. But getting Republicans to stick together as a group, I think that's something the Republican Party has been dealing with for well before the Trump era, as it were. I think it is very bad right now when you look at the House, and they're they're again calling for Mike Johnson's head. I see that there's a piece of Politico either came out this morning or late yesterday, which is Kevin McCarthy doesn't look so bad now to some Republicans. Well, yeah, I mean, Matt Gaetz, Kevin McCarthy's going after Matt Gaetz too. Wow, I don't know if you saw that. I know I promised you I'd tell you what Santos said. I'm not even sure you really are that interested, but I kind of found it funny this morning. But Kevin McCarthy went on kind of a tour going after Matt Gaetz. He said, I don't know how close you probably think the president is to Matt Gaetz, but you should probably figure that out, because Matt Gaetz does try to hitch his wagon to Trump a lot. I'm sure Gaetz probably makes a lot of things up, meaning maybe his friendship with Trump. He probably lies about who he sleeps with, too. Yeah, he's not. McCarthy's got a little bit, and I understand it, but the piece from Politico was a lot of people missing the Kevin McCarthy days. Republicans admit it. Kevin McCarthy has never looked so good, says Politico. I'm so confused as ever about what he wants, one senior GOP aide said about Mike Johnson. He hasn't given us any direction. For 9 months in his speakership, Kevin McCarthy seemed like a man with a title but no power, desperately improvising to keep his job amid factions ready to turn on him in an instant. Now, in his 4th month in alleged power, Speaker Mike Johnson has accomplished what once seemed unthinkable, making McCarthy seem like a skilled strategist and master of the House. But you can expect articles like that. But to the viewer's point, I don't know how you keep Republicans together. I mean, look, when there's a lot of Republicans, and you can judge it for whatever reason, and Democrats too, that really want to be liked by the media, really want to be liked by some other Washington elites. So they go a direction that's, hey, if I badmouth Republicans or say Republicans are doing something stupid, they'll get the attention, they'll get the fame, they'll get the glowing praise from those in the media. The media will, of course, turn on them at some point. But I go back, and I know I mentioned before about Maverick, right? Maverick, John McCain. That was a term he was given because he was willing to go after Republicans and vote against Republicans' wishes. It's been going on for a very long time. I don't have the answer. I don't think any of us have the answer to keep Republicans unified and rally around each other like Democrats are brilliant at. Because at the end of the day, AOC could say she hates some bill, but if Nancy Pelosi or whoever, Hakeem Jeffries, comes to her and says, you got to vote for it, she's going to vote for it. It's as simple as that. Here's what George Soros had to say. Sorry. So George Soros, after Democrats took control of his old seat, and I think to Byron Donald's point, Santos, even though wacky and all those stories and all those lies, he was never convicted. So shouldn't it have been up to the voters to get rid of him, not his co-workers, not his colleagues? Yeah, I think there is a very good point there. Again, I'm not a Santos fan, but I think it's worth mentioning. So he took to the New York delegation, there's a group chat, apparently, a text message. In a text message to some of his former Republican colleagues who joined state and local GOP leaders in disavowing him and spent months aggressively pushing for his ouster, Santos blamed them for costing the party a seat. This is what he had to say. I got to be careful. I hope you guys are happy with this dismal performance and the $10 million your futile, we'll say baloney, cost the party. I look very much forward to seeing most of you lose due to your absolute hate-filled campaign to remove me from Congress arbitrarily. Now go tell the Republican base what you blanking idiots did, and good luck raising money next quarter. No one really responded. One congressman, Andrew Garbarino, said, sorry, new phone, who dis? But, I mean, technically we should, well, look at our majority in the House, slimming day by day. And technically he should have been in there. I mean, whether you like him or not. All right, we're going to get away from that. We got to take a short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, another comment from a viewer. Too many uniparty Republicans who line their pockets before representing we the people. Thank you very much. So I mentioned this at the beginning of the show. Putin made a surprise pick for the presidential election, backing Biden over Trump in the rematch, saying he's more experienced and predictable. And that's the scary part as we go back earlier to what we were saying about the real serious threat of putting nukes in space by Russia to end certain satellites. And the reason predictable is such an important part, because let's face it, I don't know if you're a Trump supporter, you're not a Trump supporter, it does not matter in this scenario. Do you, well, maybe it does. Do you know what Trump would do in a scenario like Russia invading Ukraine? Do you know what he'd do when Hamas attacked Israel? I don't think you would know. I don't think Putin would know. I don't think Hamas would know. And I think there's something to be said about that. Not being predictable. There's something to be said about being predictable. Putin has picked predictable in this scenario. Biden is more experienced, predictable person, a politician of the old school, Putin said in an interview with Russian television. But we will work with any U.S. president who the American people have confidence in. I don't know. Interesting. For whatever that's worth, I can't imagine they're going to play that endorsement on any of Biden's advertisements. Okay, this is tying in with Biden. I am shocked how many times I've had to report on this, that the White House is frustrated with the media coverage of the Biden administration. So they sent out a letter to the press corps. Now, yes, recently her report has been reported on because the media's hand was forced in it. But before that, I would say that most people would look at the coverage that Biden has received as being kind of kid gloves. Biden does not give press conferences very often. He does not do sit-down interviews. And yet the media shrugs their shoulders and goes, he's the least transparent, for lack of a better term, president when it comes to press conferences and with the press. And again, the press is fine with it because they don't want to report on, I don't know, for instance, Hunter Biden. How many times when that story finally broke, when I say broke, when the deal was turned down, that the media had to kind of start reporting on it for the first time. As a matter of fact, I saw that CBS, who laid off a lot of reporters, I want to say there was 20-some news staffers that were laid off and 800 employees across their parent company. Well, one of the people that were laid off, Catherine Heritage, was the lone voice at the network probing the Hunter Biden laptop story, even saying at one point that she was receiving a lot of internal roadblocks. We know the bias is there, and we know the bias is very blatant in mainstream media. The veteran investigative reporter who has a First Amendment case that's being closely watched by journalists nationwide was among the staffers laid off. People can't make sense of this decision, said a source. The Heritage work, that they're shocked and dismayed, those who worked with her, because they believe that she brought credibility to the company. Heritage came to CBS in 2019 to be a balanced voice, covering both sides of the aisle after having served as chief intelligence correspondent for Fox News. But Heritage's most recent assignment, covering the Hunter Biden probe, put her under a microscope at the left-leaning network, the Post has learned. It was well understood on Capitol Hill that Heritage was among the first to receive tips about the Hunter Biden investigation, but she ran into, quote, internal roadblocks at CBS News. I tie that in because, the media does not want to report on these things that will be damaging to a Democrat administration. So to have them frustrated that there's coverage that they don't deem glowing, I can't imagine the press does not push back at this. Think if someone wrote to you and told you how to do your job, how that would make you feel. In the letter, and this was sent to the White House Correspondents Association, Ian Sams, spokesperson for the White House counsel's office, expressed concern over how the news media had covered special counsel Robert Hur's reports on President Joe Biden's handling of classified materials. If this were, if you want to play the game, you don't have to. If this were a Trump administration and that report had come out, do you think the coverage would have been the same? I think it would have been a lot worse. I think the media was forced to report on this because there was no other choice. They begrudgingly did so. I mentioned the day that it broke. I remember watching a certain news outlet saying something to the extent of, yeah, Biden's being questioned here, but look at what Trump did. Look at Trump. That's how it's always covered. So I want to tell you a little bit more about this because this is frustrating, I think, for those of us who pay attention to the mainstream media and how they try to spin. So we'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Thank you so much for joining us here on Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We're broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. So the White House is frustrated at the media. So they sent a letter where Ian Sams, the spokesperson, concedes that covering the report is challenging, given that it's nearly 400 pages long. This is the Hur report, and not straightforward. But Hur's reference to Biden's mental acuity, he acknowledged, have stolen attention from the crux of the matter, writing that Hur's, quote, wrong and inappropriate personal comments have distracted from due attention to the substance. So this is kind of a warning, if you will, to the White House Correspondents Association. You better get in line with how you're covering this. And by the way, and how you cover things in the future. Quote, but those facts stress the importance of careful patient coverage. Now imagine, because again, he is not their boss. Meaning Joe Biden or Ian Sams, the spokesperson for the White House counsel's office. Imagine, I don't know what profession you're in, but if someone that wasn't your boss came up and said to you, well, this stresses the importance of careful patient coverage, lecturing you about how you're doing your job. But I'll continue. Instead, many outlets, and by the way, he shared headlines to call out those outlets, have reported striking inaccuracies that misrepresent the report's conclusion about the president. And reporters in the White House briefing room have asked questions that include false content or based on false premises. The White House specifically is frustrated that the press has portrayed Hur's report as conclusively finding that Biden willfully mishandled classified material. The actual report is in its entirety is not so clear. Excuse me. What's interesting about this piece from CNN, they go on, and this has happened in the past, to do exactly what Ian Sams demanded, which is, well, let us clarify and let us go through and highlight some of the things that the White House wants us to highlight. It's unbelievable. This is Oliver Darcy, by the way, giving credit where credit's due at the CNN. Sam's letter is yet another step White House officials have taken to push back against press narratives about the report, but they've done this in the past about other issues that they're not happy with reporting on. It's the same reason why the president gets angry when asked a fair to tough question. They're not expecting that from the press corps. It's simple as that. They saw the coverage that they received during the campaign against Trump, where campaigning from the basement was encouraged. It was fine. Everything was good, and it worked in their benefit. They expected that to continue, and it would have continued, except for they forced, meaning the Biden administration forced, the media's hand in a way. On Friday, Sams appeared in the briefing room taking questions from journalists about Hur's report, and CNN has learned that over the last several days, officials with the White House and the president's personal counsel have been sparring behind the scenes with reporters about their coverage with limited success. Limited success. Yeah, I don't know. This whole piece ends up being pretty glowing. I believe they will be successful. It's hey, do you still want to be a part of the White House correspondence? Do you want questions? Because remember, when Biden does give a press conference, the reporters are handpicked. It's not like the old days, like, okay, you, it's handpicked. Look at your list. These are just facts. There's no bias here, folks. We're just reporting on what we're learning this morning. We've got to take another short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking. Actually, do I have to take another short break? No, I think I'm doing good. I think I went a little early on that last one. I think we're doing fine. Let's move away from this for a moment. Actually, I do got to take that break. I know I missed that. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back with Frankly Speaking. Just to wrap up this topic, coming from the New York Post, President Biden went ballistic on special counsel Robert Hur for allegedly asking about his son Beau's death. But a new report says the question never came up, and Biden himself raised the topic. The 81-year-old president was defending his cognitive abilities when he ripped Hur during a press conference on Thursday night. But Biden's memory appears to have failed him again. Quote, "There's even a reference that I don't remember when my son died." How in the hell dare he raise that? If you recall that from the press conference, that press conference did not go well by many reports because he then had some issues later on. Hur's report on Biden's alleged mishandling of classified information said the president's cognitive decline is so perceptible that no jury would want to convict him for stashing those records. NBC News reported Wednesday that the president himself brought up his son's 2015 death from brain cancer during the 5 hours of questioning. It was the president, not Hur or his team, who first introduced Beau Biden's death. Two sources familiar with the interview told the outlet. A lot of anger with the White House on this. Not Biden, meaning his Biden's staff, for allowing him to sit down. I believe it was for a 5-hour interview. White House facing heat for how it handled her investigation, also the way they covered it after the press conference. Probably not a great idea. In hindsight, many have been reporting that it actually caused more concerns than eased minds. Another comment. Frank, we know the legacy media is the operable wing of the Democrat Party. But with the poor ratings and falling viewership, why are they in the tank with the Democrats? It must be money, but how and for who? Well, my theory on this, if you're just asking my theory on this, is that because of journalism school and what those in the media are taught, politics is more important than the money. Now, that may sound kind of interesting or shocking or something to that extent, but these legacy media outlets, the CBS's, NBC's, ABC's, they believe that they've always been untouchable, that the money will come in, that the viewership will never change, no matter how political they get. Then you've got the reporters who went to journalism school who were told basically the biggest thing you could ever do is bring down a sitting Republican president. And if you can, get a congressman or senator, that's impressive too. but that's hence Woodward and Bernstein, right? And the almost sainthood they've been given because of Nixon. So I believe that you've seen a lot of things. Look at sports sometimes. Politics has become so pervasive that it's so much everywhere that because they in the media live in a bubble, they don't necessarily see it as shocking. They see it as their duty to protect their party, to protect their president, to protect whoever that may be that has the D next to their name. So I don't think it's necessarily, I don't think money even plays an issue into it. I don't even think that's something that they concern themselves with because, again, they believe, and I think they're wrong, they'll believe that nothing's going to change. Yes, they had the layoffs at CBS, but that's okay. They'll adapt. They wanted to probably get rid of the one reporter going after Hunter anyway. So they're happy with streamlining, and at the end of the day, it's not going to change what they report. And it doesn't matter how many times they realize, wow, people just don't want to see that bias day in and day out. I just think because in their bubble, they don't want to go to that cocktail party that evening and be forced to say that they had to report on Hunter or had to report on whatever. They'd much rather take their lumps and keep being liked. Kind of goes back to what we were saying about Republicans. Kind of interesting there. We got to take our last break. Stay with us, and then we're going to wrap things up here on Frankly Speaking. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. We have a lot to get to. Last thing on that we were just reporting on, Jim Jordan has requested materials and interview from Biden's ghostwriter. So just to finish up on that, new House lines in New York State would boost 2 Democrats and a Republican. I'm wondering what district they're saying. This is all on anonymity. Sources are saying this, so I would be curious to know what the Republican one would. It be the 23rd? They almost tried to do that before and make it so heavy Republican that they could take. Well, anyway, bipartisan redistricting commission is expected to vote today on a new set of lines for House seats in New York. They would make minor adjustments to help Democrats in some battleground races. How do you like that? Minor adjustments to help Democrats in some battleground races, but not aggressively changed that what could create new legal challenges. Again, all the articles kept saying that it made the seats competitive. Isn't that what you want? Isn't that the opposite of gerrymandering? I mean, the new lines would provide modest boosts to Democrats in 2 competitive upstate districts. I like how it's modest, according to Politico. I'd like to see that. And to a Republican in another upstate seat. I'm guessing it's probably the 23rd. According to, because that was already solid R. So you add a couple more R's in there, make the other ones competitive. Come on. Well, it's still got to be voted on. If it goes through today, it's got to be voted on by the Democrat-dominated state legislature. So if it benefits Democrats, I'm sure it'll go through. Hopefully there'll be lawsuits to clean this up. We are out of time. Wow. Yeah, we're out of time. Did you see Representative Rashida Tlaib refuse to condemn rape and sexual violence committed by Hamas? She was the only member of the House who declined to vote Wednesday for a resolution condemning the rape and sexual violence that Hamas leaders ordered members of the terror group to carry out on October 7th. That is unbelievable. We're out of time for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you to everybody who joined us. Thank you for all the comments. We'll be back tomorrow morning with Assemblyman Phil Palmisano. Don't miss it. That's tomorrow, starting at 7, only on Big Fox.